Welcome to Bloodbath and Beyond. Today we review Chopping Block, 5 idiot kidnappers, 1 final girl, and 1 very angry slasher.
Written and directed by Joshua Hull, starring Michael Malone and Raymond Kester, Chopping Block is about 5 people who lose their jobs so they kidnap their boss's daughter. Unfortunately, she happens to be the final victim of a slasher. What do we like about this movie?
I like the concept of this movie because it's inherently funny having 5 people try and kidnap someone. It's just like regular people trying to figure out how they should kidnap this person. And well, they're struggling to figure out which duct tape to use or how they should go about the entire process. I think it's just funny in general.
You have a horror movie that's happening off to the side, and then people just kind of get intersected with it. It's like 2 worlds kind of combining. So you have a regular mundane type thing, and then you have a horror movie that just happens to intersect. So it has a lot of promise in that.
The fact that the kidnappee has just escaped from a slasher, so you can only imagine the torment she's been through all night just to wind up in a fucking warehouse or the back of a van because some idiots just stumble upon her. Well, she just has a shitty day.
The worst day.
Probably the worst day, yes. It's worth mentioning here, but I will touch on this in the dislikes. I liked half of the jokes, probably. There were parts that were really funny in this movie. I think specifically when they're trying to hash out their ideas on how to kidnap people. I don't think that they were great at acting drunk, but I thought that their acting drunk was better than their regular jokes.
Well, actually, fuck you, nerd.
So there is a I don't know, an office space type of humor they're going for, a little more crude than that. It may not hit with everybody, but I think there is an audience for it. The good thing about it is it is consistent and it keeps its tone throughout the whole movie. So if you're into it, I think it'll work for the whole movie.
I was happy with the gore that we had. Don't want to talk too much about it because it's somewhat spoilery, but there is some blood sprays and there is some gore towards the end of the film, and I thought that was a nice touch.
What didn't we like about this movie?
We talked about the humor, and unfortunately, we were not really the biggest fans of it.
How does one kidnap?
Kid, a baby goat.
I know that a lot of people will enjoy it, however, it wasn't for me.
The problem with the humor, I think, is that it seemed almost like a poor man's horrible bosses. It didn't feel clever enough. It didn't feel like it was new material. And then because you can instantly make those comparisons to The Office and horrible bosses, you realize how much the characters bring to those roles that these characters didn't win us over with their comedy.
I think the acting and the delivery definitely suffered. We get that these are not actors that are in high budget movies and these are people that probably only have a handful of roles, but it definitely shows, and it's worth noting that you can't get completely invested in the characters because of that. Because their delivery of some of the jokes and because a lot of the jokes rely on them being under the influence. Whether it's drugs or alcohol, it's very difficult to act like you're drunk.
Bottom line, plans take money.
My thing is just get really drunk for real, and it's fucking natural, baby.
Right.
But if you're trying to act drunk, it comes off pretty phony and the jokes just don't hit.
Dude, there's a lot of movies that just fast-paced joke, and you miss some of them, and that's okay because you watch it again and you catch it and it's funnier. But when you're throwing mostly misses, you realize the space between the hits.
The premise had a lot of things going for it, and I don't think it was executed well, especially when it came to the ending and the closing of the film. Everything that is unraveling kind of comes to a close in about 30 seconds in one fell swoop, and you get zero closure.
The horror aspect of it is very far into the movie. So you're building up to something that doesn't pay off.
I think a big problem with that is the editing. Not the editing of the film per se, but the editing of the final feature. Right off the bat, they show you the kidnapping point from the get-go. 50 minutes in, they show you it again. So 50 minutes of that is building up all of these characters just to an inevitable disappointment almost.
No offense, right?
So when you do that, like, you know, put the middle or the end of the movie at the beginning, it's kind of to entice some sort of mystery. But what this did was actually ruin the mystery.
$5 million.
The whole point of the movie is, are they going to kidnap this person for at least the first 2/3? But you already know it. So this is a perfect example of this. They buy these animal masks, but we've already seen them in the beginning. It's not going to be funny when you surprise us with these animal masks.
Yeah, I really think that the first part was introduced maybe at the distribution level.
A better use of that time would have been the slasher killing kids at the party and seeing her get away. It gets us more invested in her, gets us understanding kind of what the threat is out there. So it just kind of felt like a wasted opportunity.
And speaking of which, Haley J. Madison, who is the final girl in this movie, is the biggest star in it.
She's coming, and you're all going to die.
She only has like 1 or 2 lines in the entire film. You would expect a movie about somebody getting kidnapped, you'd have more interaction with the kidnappers and the person being kidnapped, but there isn't really.
I'm thinking maybe there was a starting scene where we see how she ends up how she was. That was cut, wasn't filmed, time constraints.
You never know, especially with like indie films like this, because generally it's going to be a budget concern, right?
Yeah.
Like there's always so much on the chopping block, so to speak. And then, you know, some things just need to be forgotten because it's just like, oh, we can't necessarily do this with our budget constraints. But who knows? I don't know. Maybe they have a prequel in the works. Maybe they have a sequel in the works. We don't know. But as it is, I don't think this film really hits the notes that it was trying to.
It's time for our final thoughts and ratings. Overall, I just didn't find myself connecting with this movie. The humor didn't click for me. I can see where they attempted to be funny, but unfortunately, it felt like it was trying to be funny, which hurts comedy overall. I think the premise is intriguing, and I feel like they just needed a couple more scenes to really dive into it and set up a proper film that could be enjoyed. At the end of the day, I don't think I can really recommend the movie, so I'm gonna give this 1.5 Sprinkle Bandits out of 5.
Bum, bum, bum.
This movie was definitely more of a comedy than a horror, but also not that funny. There's a lot of people in funny situations, and the premise is funny, but I don't think that it was utilized to the best of its ability. I think the writing really lacked here. And on top of that, I don't think the actors quite delivered the material that was intended to be funny.
Yeah.
That said, I did enjoy some of the characters, but as an entire package and as a movie, I left it unsatisfied, especially because of the ending. I think the ending really needed to be tightened up. We needed more closure. So I'm gonna give this 1.5 man-sized cocks out of 5. As always, thank you for watching. Like this video and comment below with your thoughts on the film if you've seen it. If you haven't and you do want to check it out, there are links in the description where you can find it. And this is your first time here, make sure you subscribe to the channel to stay updated with everything Bloodbath and beyond. Also buy a shirt.